So it's not uncommon for disabled people to be denied access to public transport or certain buildings, and despite work being done to improve accessibility, it's an issue that's still widespread.
In May earlier this year, the BBC security correspondent Frank Gardner, who's a wheelchair user, posted on X that he was stuck waiting on an empty plane at Heathrow Airport long after everyone else had left because there were no staff to move his wheelchair. Last week, Paralympic champion Baroness Tanni Grey-Thompson wrote on social media that she was forced to crawl off a train after waiting for assistance at London's King's Cross station for 20 minutes before giving up.
And then just 2 days ago, a day that should have been a real celebration for University College London student Jamie Hale, overshadowed by accessibility issues. Jamie wasn't able to get up to the stage at the graduation ceremony. Instead, had to be awarded their degree on the ground floor, separately from other graduates. Well, we can speak to Jamie now. Good morning to you, Jamie, along with Dennis Queen, who's the co-chair of Greater Manchester Coalition of Disabled People, who's with us in the studio. Very good morning to both. Jamie, can I start with you? Do you want to just take us through what happened?
Of course. So I was set to graduate from my master's at UCL, and there had been various emails back and forth about access. There had been a way of selecting that you would need wheelchair access at booking stage, which I thought was fantastic. And so it was pretty devastating when they came to get me ahead of my being called on stage. And the backstage route they took me round, I took one look at the lift, and the safe working weight limit was well below the weight of me in my electric wheelchair. And that meant that there wasn't a way of me being able to get safely onto the stage. And my wheelchair isn't particularly heavy for a sort of high-spec electric wheelchair. I'm not particularly heavy, and the weight limit for the lift was just completely inadequate, and this hadn't been communicated or discussed at a step where it could be resolved. So I was just stuck backstage, realising that after 5 years of hard work on my master's, I wouldn't have the same graduation opportunity as my peers. But then, honestly, that also felt quite reflective of my experience at UCL overall as a wheelchair user and the amount of work that still needs to be done there.
Yeah, Jamie, can I say one thing, first of all? Congratulations on behalf of everyone watching this for your graduation. And I only wish it could have been so much better of a day for you. Give us an insight on what the impact of a moment like that. And as you reflected there, it's not the first time this will have happened to you, but tell us a little bit about what that feels like in the moment and the impact it has on you.
I think I was quite stunned, and it meant that I had to move out of a mindset that was about celebrating a master's that I'd managed to achieve against very steep odds, and that was into managing a situation where the staff from UCL were incredible on the day, but where it was so clear that there were massive institutional and procedural failings. And it just felt like another reminder that actually, as a wheelchair user, universities don't necessarily want you, that you are complicated, difficult to accommodate, all of these things, that something that seems very simple to me, checking capacity and weight limits of lifts, wasn't done at the UCL end, and I suspect nor did the South Bank Centre make it clear to people hiring it that the lifts to the stage aren't suitable for wheelchair users. And it was just this sense that ultimately, in many ways, I had a very inequitable and second-class student experience at UCL, and my graduation was more of the same.
Dennis, you campaign for the equal rights, accessibility for disabled people. Now, at the South Bank Centre, it said, we're extremely sorry for Jamie's experience during the UCL graduation. We recognise there's always more work to do. At the centre, everyone is welcome. We work hard to make sure our buildings and spaces are accessible to all. What I'm hearing, though, is there are laws, there are regulations, there are boxes to tick, but then that common sense or extra stage of thinking isn't applied because they've done what they need to do. these places?
That's what they think, yeah. So they think my building's okay, that's the places that are okay. So in their head it's done, and there still needs to be a level of customer service and the correct attitude on top, and also then those access provisions being used correctly, which I think from reading what Jamie's had to say online, I think what happened was they could have provided better access, but they decided to use the space differently. But another thing is, as well as this affecting students at their graduation, so Jamie won't be the only person this happened to yesterday, and that's really sad to say. It's also an issue about places like the South Bank. They are accessible if you're a passive recipient of what's going on in there. So I'm sure, Jamie, as you said, you were able to access the viewing area, the kind of audience space, but not actually able to get up on that stage. So it also limits our work in all sorts of ways as performers. Jamie and I both performers. And this would have been a simple case of checking it and using the provisions they had properly.
It's really interesting because I'm getting the impression from both of you that the individuals involved, when you're in a place, want to help.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and it's like this, the system somehow is not... Would you say that, Jamie, that, you know, I think you referenced the individuals who are trying to help you in the moment, but it was like somehow the system has gone wrong.
It was an absolute system failure, and part of that comes down to this assumption that all wheelchair users need the same thing, and therefore wheelchair access just is. If I need a toilet, I need access to a toilet with a hoist, but on the other hand, I can go very long distances because my electric wheelchair has a good battery life and I can't get on that lift. Things would be a very different set of challenges for a manual wheelchair user. But I think it's reflective of failures at institutions that should be nationally leading, like UCL and the South Bank Centre, but also failures across the sector, that I'm very conscious that that theatre and that space will be used by other people, and that this won't be the only time that this happens, and yet that consideration to things like this just isn't seen as a priority. And sure, having to get your graduation certificate on the floor, or handshake rather, on the floor instead of on the stage doesn't sound like that big a deal, but partly it was just the upset of something I'd worked so hard for ending like that, and partly it was just the way that it becomes another reminder, like when it took weeks for them to timetable one of my classes in an accessible room. I think that was a 5-week wait. I think it was maybe 2 years before there was a toilet I could use on campus. That lots of the amazing extracurricular events that UCL organises and prides itself on take place in inaccessible rooms, and when I'd asked for things to be moved, I was just flatly refused. So it's overall just a case of places not recognising that it's not just a matter of fairness or morals or justice to give disabled people, and I guess in this case wheelchair users, the same opportunities as other people. It's also a matter of legal obligation, and I think places forget both sides of that.
We should say Dr. Michael Spence, UCL President and Provost, says, we apologise unreservedly and acknowledge it was unacceptable that Jamie was unable to cross the platform to celebrate this important moment. We know we must do more to support our disabled staff and students, and have recently launched a 5-year inclusive environments plan. Dennis, go on. Your face says it all, doesn't it?
Why didn't they follow their 5-year plan? Like, this is the other thing. The information's there. People know what they're supposed to do, but it's whether they do it, and they may well still hire the same venue next year. So it is, as you said before, it's a really systemic problem. It's everywhere we go, and it's also kind of symptomatic of the issues in wider society.
Today, there will be people in large buildings, small buildings, who say, no, well, we've got everything in place. It wouldn't happen to us, which I imagine UCL, the South Bank, thought as well. What can they do as an extra? They've ticked the boxes, the rules and regulations. They've got all the access and everything. What can they do something extra to make sure, actually, we need to apply a bit more common sense here?
Yeah, pay attention and listen to disabled people, really. Because also students have been campaigning, so university students have been campaigning for years now about problems with their student allowances, problems with getting universities to agree to meet their access needs. Then less than 40% find that the ones that are agreed by university are actually met. But also when we look at the wider education system, so for example the school system, since 1994, we have nearly doubled the amount of children in segregation, in segregated education. And that's the opposite direction to the one we want to be going in.
Because of disability?
Yeah, because of, well, not because of disability, because of lack of access.
Fair point. Fair point. Dennis, thank you very much. Dennis Queen, co-chair of the Greater Manchester Coalition of Disabled People. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jamie, may I add my congratulations for you receiving your Masters, and I am sorry that the experience wasn't all it should have been, but thank you very much for telling us your story. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Let's see, time now is 7:29.